So, welcome everybody to Seasonal Pathways ECE Vodcast. And I am so honored to share with you today somebody new to our team, somebody who's come on board to really help us in an area that we're not as equipped to deal with as she is in this time frame. And this is Lindsey Walker. And Lindsey is serving as the subject matter expert to provide us content and support with the emerging leaders that are coming aboard in ECE leadership. So welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much for having me.
It is our joy and our honor. Honestly, it is. So tell us just a little bit about your journey from mom and into the field of early care and education as a director.
Yes. So I had been a part of an after school program for about a year in college. And I enjoyed working with the kids. I loved it. I thought that they were so much fun. Actually, my initial background is actually in music. And so I had pursued that for a while. Whenever my husband and I moved back to the Nashville area, we both knew that over time we wanted to own our own businesses. And an opportunity that kind of just fell in my lap was that my mother-in-law owned a center that no longer had a center in it. And she'd been trying to encouraged me for years to do something with this center. She had previous tenants in it, and whenever those tenants had moved out, she was always like, "Hey, childcare." She would try to nudge me in that direction. And at the time that I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter, I was in a bit of a sabbatical time of my life. I was in between. We had just moved to Nashville again. I didn't really have a job lined up or anything yet, and it came back. It had been in the back of my mind for a really long time. And I just decided, she kept telling me that, this really wouldn't take that long to get up and going. I'll help you every step of the way and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I decided, I called her up and said, "Hey, let's go, let's do this." It did take a bit longer to get the center started than what we had initially planned on. We started working on it, I think in January or February, and we had anticipated being able to open in May because it was already decked out as a center. It hadn't been closed all that long. There wasn't a whole lot that we needed to do to the facility. Of course, the state often takes their time. So anyway, we opened the week that I had my baby. So that was not planned at all. I had actually at that point, tried to convince her we should probably delay this a little bit, but she really wanted to move forward. And so we did. And so she actually did a lot of the heavy lifting from the very, very beginning. So that's how I found my way into early childhood.
And that's often the way things happen. You have an opportunity. It's something that you've dabbled in before in the school age and all that. So you weren't afraid of it because you kind of had an idea. And you know what? Sometimes when you have all of those pieces in place, it just makes good business sense. So, good for you for doing that. The timing, oh my gosh.
Yes.
Right when your daughter was born. But, sometimes those are the best times because then you had a built-in place for your child too.
Yes. And that was wonderful that, my children have been able to attend the center. But since my daughter wasn't actually old enough to be in the center yet at the time that we had opened, my father-in-law had this camper. And so we had this camper set out in the parking lot. And I was conducting interviews with my daughter just days old.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I had actually hired Grace, my director, my current director now. I hired her in an interview. Bailey was 4 days old at that time. So she has known Bailey since she was 4 days old. But yes, we had that interview in that camper.
That is exciting. Well, one of the things I'm thrilled about is the writing that you've already done for us. So the blog that you did talking about Gen Zs. First of all, it was a huge eye opener for me. It touched me to the core. I told you I had tears in my eyes when I read it because I had no idea that other generations, in particular Gen Zs, had these deep feelings when it came to how connecting with people and with social media and things like that. And so loved the article, just absolutely loved it. So glad it's out there. And if you guys have not read it yet, the link is in the caption here below. In the article itself, there are some things that really captured my attention. And the first thing you say was, "Robin, do you realize the PTSD this gave me?" So talk about those first days and the trauma that happens when you're new to all of this and overwhelmed with the responsibility.
First of all, I mean, I loved, the babies were actually my favorite. However, I mean, I think that a lot of people go through this whenever they first open a center. It's overwhelming whenever, you have a room full of babies because that's initially typically what you get. So oftentimes you get infants at first, and they tend to feed off of each other. And so I didn't anticipate that initially. Whenever an infant first comes in, they're going to cry a lot. Of course they are. This was a lot of toddlers and things, right? A lot of toddlers and infants at first. I guess especially the toddlers, they have that separation anxiety, and so if you have one that's a big crier, you're going to have a whole bunch that are big criers, and then that's all going to feed. And I did not realize, I thought that after a week or two children adjust, and most of them do. But whenever you have children that are brand new to this, and then there's other kids that everybody's brand new to this, and they're all feeding off of each other, it takes a little longer for them to actually adjust. And so that was, for one thing, something that I didn't expect. Another thing that I didn't expect was that the hiring process would be so incredibly difficult. Like I had told you, I had hired Grace, my current director now, in that camper. Beforehand, though, I did not expect this at all. That people just ghost you. You reach out to them, they seem like they're engaged, and then they just don't. And so I think that this was also had, I think, something to do with the baby blues that I was also having. So I had all of these interviews lined up, and it seemed like nobody was showing up, or the ones who did were just awful. And I actually initially thought that Grace didn't show up. What I didn't realize is that she was actually in the center with my mother-in-law, and but I thought that she didn't show, and so I was just losing it because this was another one that ghosted me, right? And then so I was like starting to lose it whenever she walked in. I was just so relieved that she was an amazing person. And she's been incredible. I didn't expect that, and so that ended up being one of our very first battles. Of course, I'm sure this is the case for majority of centers that open, is just that you call and you call and you call and you call and you interview. You might even have some phone interviews in there, and then they still don't necessarily show up. So I feel like that was a really big eye-opening moment, I think. And even whenever you do hire, they're not always the people that you think that they were as well. That was another big struggle, is like learning how to hire and hire the right people and know what those red flags are. Maybe this is a little bit, this is something that I have learned probably in the last year. Put your skeptics in front, and in charge of hiring. Seriously, if you're an optimistic person, as
Right.
I am to a fault, maybe the hiring isn't for you.
And I'm really an advocate for two people being present when you do the hiring,
Mhm.
because one can
Yes.
be watching and listening from one perspective, and the other can be watching and listening from a different perspective. We'll do a whole podcast on that sometime, on hiring. But yes, that really hits home, especially the first year you go through, when it's your own center, or when it's the first time you've had full responsibility for hiring. But what happens is, you think they look good on paper, you think they
Hmm.
talked well with you, and then they don't show up, or they give you excuses. And unfortunate, but a lot of the baby boomers and other generations, they say, oh, it's these young kids today. But you know what? It's really not. It's
Hmm.
just people in general just don't have, in my opinion now, just don't have
Hmm.
the same sensitivity to the value of other people's time. And I just find that so important. So those that do show up on time, for those that do really give a good interview, you want to do everything you can to keep those. And sometimes they still show up as different people. It's awful, but very true.
Yes, and can I add a little something to that? I think what is really one of the things, of course, there's a lot of different things that are going on with millennials and with Gen Z, but I think they have a really hard time with confrontation, even simple
Oh,
confrontation.
good point.
And so I don't necessarily mean that they mean to waste your time, while that is absolutely valid. that they waste your time whenever you have an interview set up, you have everything ready to go, you have these questions, you've reviewed their resume, you spent all of this time and put all of this effort into talking with somebody, having a meeting with somebody, and then they just don't show up. But I think that sometimes they don't have those skills to just say, you know what, I'm really not that interested in this position. I applied for this for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I'm just really not that interested. They won't pick up the phone and do that. I think that it's a really important opportunity that we all have to teach those skills to the ones who do show up, of course, but to be able to teach them how to have those conversations. Maybe not that specifically, but those types of confrontations that will come up throughout their life.
That is incredibly insightful. Yes, I can really see that. I wonder, what do you think about in the conversation you might have with them on the phone? Because I think a phone interview is obviously good to have before you have the in-person interview. What do you think about asking them on the phone? After all of this that I've shared with you, do you feel like it might be a good fit? Because I totally understand sometimes it's not a good fit, people. Do you give them an out? And if you do, would they take it?
Right. And that's that. I don't think I've actually tried that, but that would be a really good way to kind of try and navigate that and see if they would. They may or they may not.
Right.
Just because they don't even want to have that conversation. But if that's a really good way to maybe give them an out, like, what do you think?
Okay, so you had this little rocky start to begin with, and then in your blog you say you felt like you were really ill-equipped. So what are some of the skills or responsibilities that you think either Seasonal Pathways or others that are listening could help these emerging leaders that are coming up? Because the reality is we really want to equip them so when they come to us or when they replace us, that they will be so well equipped that they'll make their own mistakes. They don't need to make the same ones that we made. Do you have a few ideas on some of the things that you felt ill-equipped about that maybe we could provide for these up and coming seasonal leaders?
For one thing, just as I mentioned, the hard conversations, that's not easy for anyone, but any kind of training on helping people that are starting centers or becoming managers to be able to have those difficult conversations, teaching people how to release people into the marketplace. It's a better way to put it. I think though that would be a really great thing because I feel like I was very ill-equipped on that as well. I definitely came across as way too nice at first. And so people thought that they could just kind of trample over me at first. And so it's taken a long journey to realize, to realize that I had some growing to do instead of expecting them to respond to me a certain way whenever they're just reacting off of what they're getting from me. I think that learning to ask questions, learning to ask the right questions would be a really great thing because I definitely didn't realize that. I was taught a very command and control way of management. And while there may be moments where that's called for, you have to build relationships first. You have to build that relationship, build that trust before you can be like, okay, all right, then we have to do this, and this today. This has to happen. But you can't be like that all the time. You have to build the trust first. And then if they trust you, then if you have to be like that at a certain moment in time, then they'll respond to you differently. So asking the right questions, really taking their feedback, really listening. I think that something that we need to do for the younger generation is listen to them. I know mental health is a really hot topic right now. And why is that? I think that goes back to some of the loneliness that we talked about in the blog, but also they're not taught to deal with stress, to cope with things. I don't think they're taught that in schools anymore. They're definitely not taught it at home. Where are they getting it? And it's not for me to say whether it's right or whether it's wrong. It needs to come from work, but it needs to come from somewhere. They're not getting it. Being able to listen and just, even if it's on personal things, they might need to cry in your office for a little while and just listen. Just listen. Don't tell them how to fix their life.
Very good point. Yes. Yeah.
But being able to just listen to people, listen to their feedback as well, but also just be able to listen to them as a companion, somebody that they can talk to if they need to, or cry in your office.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is we need to have a safe place for them to feel like they can share what is stressful for them. And we need to be just the sounding board, like you say, absorb the sound, don't get in and tell them what to do. How do you balance that so that you're not an enabler, or so that
True.
they're not in there all the time crying or wanting you to be the mom?
Now that is a danger with, having that safe space. And at a certain point, and hopefully you've built this trust with that person, at a certain point, you can be like, well, okay, all right, you really do need to, we need you to go back into your classroom. And hopefully they've kind of recovered enough that they can do that.
Mhm.
Or they might need to go home for the day. But yeah, at a certain point, you do have to turn that around and be the boss, basically.
Mhm.
But hopefully you have built that trust. They might actually need a couple of crying sessions in your office.
Right.
That might have to be okay.
Mhm.
Just because we're dealing with a very different generation, I think,
Mhm.
and that hasn't been taught these skills, how to manage their own stress. Because if you think about it, and I'm going to get a little off topic here, could you imagine, really, like really, really imagine growing up with what Gen Z has grown up with? And I think about this because I have a Gen Alpha, and what she's having, well, I have three of them, and what they're going to have to grow up. I don't know about you, but of course we all knew growing up that there were wars going on, that there were different things going on in the world, but we didn't know the details of those things going on.
That's true.
And we have kids that have access to all of this from very, very young. They're not mentally equipped to deal with things like war. And then there's climate change. There's different things going on that they know a lot. There's a lot of political things going on right now. A lot of inability to find common ground right now amongst political parties, and they know about all of it. And they've known about all of it for a really long time. Could you imagine in your childhood knowing that that was going on and
Yeah.
knowing the actual details of that, as opposed to, I think, where it was before, where we had a little bit more of a high level of knowing that it was going on, but not really knowing a whole lot about it, if that
Do
makes
you feel
sense.
like we might have felt more protected because we
Yes.
didn't hear all the nitty gritty, where these guys are hearing everything and the disharmony in the protection? So there's no protection when there's disharmony within the realms of
Correct.
that
Yeah. So
protection.
it's no wonder they're activists.
Hmm.
It makes perfect sense whenever you sit down and think about it, what all they have, what all they've experienced. It's, in one sense, yes, of course, we've all grown up with these things going on in the background, but they've really been in the know about all of these things. And I don't think that as young children, they were equipped in any way, shape, or form to handle it. And so they're still trying to deal with that. I think
Hmm.
that's just my opinion.
Hmm.
But
No, I think that those are very good points for us to know all the different generations, so we can be more aware and empathetic, when
yes,
needed.
yes, I definitely
Um,
think we need to be very empathetic to them.
mhm. I like what you're saying as far as what we can do in the centers by opening our doors, providing a safe place. And I also like the idea of thinking through the ramifications of that. And that's where, the older we are, the more we could put those boundaries in place in a very
Hmm.
appropriate way, saying,
Yes.
y- checking in the next day saying, hey, you look great. So giving them as affirmative responses back. Or, I can see you're still bothered. Would you like me to help you find a therapist to talk with? Something that broadens it more than makes you the responsible person then now for their
Right.
life.
Yeah, and I think Simon Sinek is the one that talks about this, but he does talk about how the workplace has become a bit of a place of pressure in a lot of ways, because we don't have those community things that we used to have. Most people, I don't know about most, but a lot of people don't find themselves in churches or religious organizations anymore. We don't have neighborhood barbecues anymore. We don't have necessarily a whole lot of sports leagues like there used to be, where people might find more community in all of those things. And then work. This is something that really hit me whenever he said it, is that work in a lot of ways have become a therapist as well. We're not obviously therapists, but we might have to lend an ear every now and then,
Right.
if
Yes.
that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I think what this has opened up for me is just where we try to separate, or we've been taught, my generation's been taught to separate work from home, work from, don't bring your problems to
Right.
work, kind of a thing. Whereas there is, for a lot of people, there is no other place to take their problems. And if you internalize it, that's a bigger problem. So maybe there is a place for this in our workplace, or at least a place for them to come for information so they could come and find the right kind of outlets then to have a healthier life or whatever. I think
Yes.
this goes back to what you were talking about really specifically in the blog, the whole idea of connection. And again, I saw the different generations and the way, connection, what the term connection meant to each different generation. So I think it was really impactful when you talked about social media. So would you elaborate on that just a little bit?
So a lot of things go on via texting now. And even growing up, I think with it, I am old enough that social media wasn't really a thing until I was in college already. So whenever they grew up with social media, they couldn't necessarily get away the same way that we could, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If you still have a presence online and all of your friends are present online, they may not be your friends online. So there's not this ability to get away. So I think that has impacted them a lot. They feel like they have friends, but they're not having face-to-face interactions with a lot of their friends the way that we used to. In the book Glow Kids by Nick Cauderas, it was a study of 408 to 11th graders, and only 35% of teens socialize face-to-face anymore, which that's staggering. They're more communicating through text and through social media avenues. I mean, I don't know about you, but as a teen and in my 20s, I had a pretty full social schedule.
Well, we didn't even have text when I was a teen. So. Absolutely.
We had to pay for
yes.
text whenever I was a teen.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Well, let's talk about a few things. Like if you're in your center, what are some things that you can do or that you find yourself doing to bring more connection?
Some of the things that we are doing as a center to try and bring out this connection is we started from basically onboarding as well. So we make sure that they have a lot of time to connect with all of the teachers, everybody. So we spend a lot of time onboarding. Probably at least a month of just, being in different classrooms and being with different teachers before they are released into their own classroom of sorts, because we want them to build that connection and with each other as well. So not just with us as management. We spend a lot of time in our classrooms observing, but not in the official observation time. We do that, but we're in and out of each classroom every day, and making sure to help the teachers whenever we're in there, not to try and put any pressure on or anything like that. This is something for the younger generations. I think for me, I don't think I would have desired that. I don't think I would have desired having people just watch me all the time, but they really seem to like you being around and helping. They really need a lot of support. They don't always know how or when to ask for help, I think. And so I think that's why maybe they like having even management in the classrooms more, because they want that help. They want that support. They want that validation. They want that feedback. I think a lot more than previous generations. We do a lot of the usual things that you hear. We do a lot of lunches. We do a lot of donuts. We do a lot of coffee runs, that sort of thing as well, which helps.
So those are
We
those
do a lot of
personal
gifts.
touches that make people
Yes,
feel.
yes. And whenever
Yeah.
we do gifts, we do try to make it very personal to
Yeah.
them. So whenever
Okay.
they onboard, we give them a little sheet of like, okay, all right, what kind of stuff do you like? What kind of
Nice.
scented things do you like as far as lotions? What kind of candy bars do you like? What kind of, are you a soda person? Or are you a coffee person? Or are you a tea person?
There
Or
you go.
just like a little, just so that we know that whenever we give them gifts, they're actually tailored specifically to them. What's your favorite color? Those kinds of questions. I'd say another thing that we do, and this has really helped build our community, I think, is that our meetings, we do a lot of icebreakers for one thing. I would highly recommend doing it. I know they seem really, really cheesy and everything, but they really help you get to know your staff. They really do. And I found that they love doing that stuff. Another thing that we do, of course, we always have a set agenda. We have things that we want to talk about, but most of the time, through most of the majority of our meetings, it's almost open floor. We ask the questions, we do the listening. We don't do a lot of talking at our staff. We let them give us a whole lot of like, what's going on? What do you need from us? How can we help? We try to find questions to ask instead of telling them what to do.
Lindsey, these have been amazing. I can't wait to our next conversation, but I think you've really given us some really good ideas about supporting each other, making sure connection is realistic and relational. We think we can, bring that across the generations, but really hone into the idea of the Gen Zs. They're not going to share with you that they have a need unless you provide an opening for them to do that. So that's something really important for us to realize. And there are things that we can do in our centers, the personal touches, building relationships. Thank you for sharing all of these things. And we look forward to your next blog and to your next podcast. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Robin.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Seasonal Pathways ECE Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed some of the tips and ideas and really thought-provoking conversation today. So if you liked us, do us the favor of subscribing, liking, and giving us a thumbs up so we can bring you more. Until next week, thanks for tuning in.